Good afternoon, everyone. This is Diana. Thank you so much for joining us today and welcome to Bloomerang Academy. Today we're talking about creating thank you letters in Bloomerang. Of course, whatever we talk about here today, you can apply to other types of letters, but we wanted to focus in on thank you letters because this is something we know that everyone does. So we'll take a look at creating thank you letters for some monetary donations. We'll also take a look at what merge fields you might want to use if you're creating thank you letters for in-kind donations. And then at the end, we'll also take a look at our NCOA feature. That's the National Change of Address that comes free with standard Bloomerang licenses. All you need to do is turn this on in your database and you can get the benefits of free nightly NCOA updates. So I'll show you how that works in a little bit as well. So before we get to the letter piece itself, let's go back and enter a gift because that's where everything starts. So we're going to go to John Watson, click New Donation. If he has any ongoing pledges or recurring donations, you'll be able to select that as an option. But for today, we're just going to enter a one-time donation. So let's say that John Watson gave a donation today in the amount of $500. We'll want to fill in the rest of our fields. Anything in green, of course, is required. And the other fields are optional, but if you already have them or already know what those values are, go ahead and fill those in. So let's say he gave $500 to our unrestricted fund because we have a COVID-19 campaign going on, and this was in response to a crisis email that we sent. He sent in a check. Let's say the check number is 12345, and that was very quick. We got that on the same day. Before I click Save, I want to point out that any of these fields here on the transaction or on the donation itself, we can use as merge fields in the letter. So if you already have those fields and you know you want to include them in the letter, please fill them out so that they're available once you have or once we start with the letter. Now we're going to click Save. From here, actually, before we go to the letter, I also wanted to point out our acknowledgement field here because we're going to be running acknowledgement letters today. By default, the acknowledgement status is set to no. Once we run our acknowledgement letter, I'll go back to this and show you how it flips the acknowledgement field from no to yes. If you also have a constituent, for example, who gives every month or every 2 weeks, they might tell you that they don't want to receive a letter, a physical letter in the mail that often. So you can always change that to do not acknowledge. If, let's say, they just want to receive a letter at the end of the year, that's how you would use that. But the default for this is no. We'll see how the letter changes that, and so we'll leave it as is. Now, when we're creating our letter, we'll go to the letter feature here. I do want to point out that this is our letter feature. This is our email feature, and these two don't talk to each other. So you can't create a letter with the intention of sending the PDF via email. The letters that we have here will give you a PDF file of the letters that we generate. This is designed for you to download and print out and mail to the constituents, or if you wanted to email them personally as an attachment, you can do that with the PDF files, but it does not talk to our email feature. So let's go to our letters. If you haven't run letters in Bloomerang before, your screen is going to look a little bit different. You might have a button that says create your first letter. If you're like me and you have a couple of letters you've already run in your database, you're going to see your most recent mailings and you're going to see any letters that were already created within Bloomerang. For today, we're going to start out with a new letter. So we'll click New. And step one is asking us, how are you filtering your audience? If you're not sure what type of letter you want to create, this gives you a little bit of guidance. For example, for constituent letters, this is great for profile-based solicitations or newsletters. The key thing here as well is that constituent letters have access to constituent fields. If you're wanting to create an acknowledgement letter and want to include things like date, amount, fund, that's not going to be available in this type of letter. If you want that type of letter, what you want is a transaction, because those are transaction fields and they're going to be available in a transaction letter. So if you're looking to create acknowledgements, receipts, pledge reminders, transaction letter is what you want. Now, if you're looking to communicate regarding your events or your volunteers and you're tracking those via interactions, interaction letter is what you would want. For today, we need a transaction letter. We're going to describe our letter. This is the name of the letter that's going to appear in your letter list. So just name it something descriptive so that anyone who's in your database knows exactly what that letter is. Second, it's going to ask us for a purpose. When you run letters in Bloomerang, it will automatically generate interactions for the constituents who were part of that mailing. So if it's a thank you letter, it's going to create an interaction for that mailing. If it's an email, it's going to create an interaction for that email. So we need to know what the purpose for this mailing is. Purpose is part of the interaction fields that we have, so we need to know what to populate in that field, what this letter is for. You can select a drop-down here. This is a fixed list of the purpose or of the different purposes available in Bloomerang. If there's anything on this list, or if you're creating a mailing and the purpose is not available, you can always choose other. I also want to point out the difference between acknowledgement and receipt. So this could be a little bit confusing. In Bloomerang, acknowledgement is what we use for thank you letters. And if we select acknowledgement, if we go back to the acknowledgement field on the donation, this purpose is what flips that flag from no to yes once we run this letter. We'll take a look at that. Receipt, on the other hand, is what we would use if you were writing or sending your year-end tax receipts to your customers. So your general thank you letters, that would be acknowledgement, and that would flip the acknowledgement flag on the transaction. Receipt is for your year-end tax receipts. So today, we'll select acknowledgement. The next section we have here asks you if you want to create one letter per household, constituent, or transaction. Let's say I have 2 gifts on my timeline that meet our filters that we'll get to in a moment. If I have 2 gifts and we select 1 letter per transaction, it's going to generate 2 letters, 1 for each of the gifts. If I have 2 gifts and we select 1 letter per constituent, it's only going to generate 1 letter. Now let's say I have 2 gifts that meets the filters and my husband has 1. If we select to create 1 letter per household, our entire household, both of us will only get that 1 gift between the 2, 1 letter, I should say, between the 2 of us. As a general rule, I like leaving this as household because of course the gift isn't just coming from the individual. Most of the time, it's going to be coming from the household, even though it's only on one constituent's timeline. We have another field here that says allow blank merge fields. This is a checkbox. So if you think about it in Word, when you create a letter, you have what they call a data source. From the data source is where you pull your merge fields. It's the same thing here, only your Bloomerang database is your data source. So earlier when we entered the donation, we saw fields like date, amount, fund, campaign, check number. All of those can be inserted as merge fields into our letter. If you click this checkbox to allow blank merge fields, if you have anything here that's blank, so for example, if a gift doesn't have a campaign, I forgot to put one in, or It's not a check, so it doesn't have a check number. Do I want the field to show up blank anyway? If you would like to do that, you can click this checkbox. If not, you can leave it unclicked. The other part here is we have allow bad, incomplete, or missing addresses. Automatically, these things are going to be excluded from the mailing, but if you would like to include this and generate the letters for those constituents anyway, you can click the checkbox. We see some of our customers do this if they want to verify if these constituents have missing addresses, because they can fix it right away so they can generate the letter. Or maybe they don't have the physical mailing address for that constituent, but they're going to hand deliver the letter, or they're going to send a personal email with the letter as an attachment. This would be a good option for you. We'll leave that unclicked for now. And then we'll click next. Once we click next, we're now in our letter editor. So this allows me to edit the design of the letter. So this is what the letter is going to look like once we generate it. Of course, you have your filter tab. And if you've been using reports or emails in Bloomerang, this is the same method or the same system throughout. And then we have the details tab. This is what we did in step 2. So if you need to change any of these details, you can always go back to this tab. So the letter editor is fairly easy to use. I like to say that if you've used Word or any different kind of word processing software, this is going to be familiar to you. We don't see the toolbar yet up here, but once we click into the letter, the toolbar is going to appear. And as you can see, you have your same formatting options here, your same text formatting options, your copy paste, your alignment, indent, etc. What's new here for you is the insert Bloomerang field. This is what we'll use to insert the merge fields, and insert Bloomerang data table. This is particularly useful if you want to acknowledge, or if you want to run acknowledgement letters that may have more than one gift. So if a constituent has more than one gift that meets the filters, you can use the Bloomerang data table to itemize the gifts that they've given. So first, let's go to our letter here, and let's make a couple changes. The first thing I want to do is, let's say I want to use a letterhead. If I have our letterhead in image format, in JPEG or PNG, even GIF actually, but since you're going to be printing that out, that is a little bit less useful. But if you have your logo or your letterhead in an image file, you can insert that into your letter. And the way that you do that is you place your cursor where you would like the image to be. So I'm placing that right here, right next to my organization info. And here's the button to click to insert or edit an image. So we'll click that. And this is the browse button. So we'll click on that again. This brings up my Bloomerang image manager. My Bloomerang image manager contains all of the images that have already been uploaded into my database. It doesn't matter if I've uploaded these images or another user in the database has uploaded these images, I'll have access to these. So you can select from one of your images that are already in the image gallery, or if there's a new image that you would like to upload and include into the letter, you can always choose a file, select the file from your computer. Let's see. Let's say we want to use this image of Blossom, and then we'll click upload. Once I click upload, you'll see that it's being put there, and that will insert it into the letter. Now, it's a little bit bigger than I would want, and what I need to do to resize that is just click on the image and click and drag the corners to an ideal size that I want. Now, notice it looks a little bit off. The text butts up right against the image, and I don't really like that. So what I can do is change the alignment. or the text wrapping. For example, if I want the image to be on the left and I want the words to be on the right, I can do it this way. Or maybe I want the image to be in line with the text and have the image be centered. I can click on that. Or maybe I want the image to the right and have the text to the left. That looks a little bit better, and we'll resize that image just a little bit to make that look a little bit better. So you can change those up. You can control how the text wraps around the image and how the image is aligned. So again, if you have your logo or your letterhead as an image file, you can insert that in Bloomerang and start using that. So once I have my image, let's take a look at the actual content of the letter. You may have noticed that my contact information has already been populated here. This pulls directly from your organization settings. So if you see that this needs to be updated, go to Settings, View All Settings, and then My Organization. You can update that information there. You'll also see that we already have some merge fields populated. I know they're merge fields because the text is wrapped around these boxes. These are going to populate for the constituent. So if I have, for example, 10 letters that I'm going to be generating, this will populate according to each of those recipients. Let's change a couple of these fields. So let's say we have name here, and instead of using name, I want envelope name. I'm going to place my cursor just to the right of the field, and if I backspace, that's going to take that out. And then I can click on the icon to insert Bloomerang field. Once we click that, this shows us all the different fields from Bloomerang we can insert as a merge field. This includes default fields as well as custom fields. And if you're new to running letters or even emails, I suggest you can even just browse through to see the different fields that are available. There are a lot, but they're also broken down into categories. So these are the different constituent fields. These are the fields that you would see on the constituent's profile. If you scroll down, because this is a transaction letter, we also have access to our transaction fields. So this is the importance of choosing transaction in your step 1. If we had chosen constituent or interaction, we wouldn't have had access to our transaction fields. So keep that in mind for when you're creating your letters. The type of letter that you have dictates what kind of fields are available for you to use as a merge field. So for today, we're replacing name with envelope name. I know that's a field that's in there, so I can also just search to bring up that field that I want. We're going to click that, and it puts in the envelope name. Also, maybe instead of formal name, my organization is a little bit more informal. So we'll backspace on that and click on the informal name field instead. Now I'm going to click into this again just to show you the other name fields that are available. So you have envelope name, first name, formal name, household name. In general, when you're inserting name fields into a letter or an email, you want to use name fields that are common to all the different types of constituents that you have. If you have an organization that you need to send a thank you letter to, they might not necessarily have a first name, but you know that they will have an informal name or a formal name. So in general, I tend to stay away from first name or last name, first name, last name. I'll use things like envelope name, formal name, informal name. Okay, so we have that. And we also have here that says we wanted to thank you for your amount. That's going to populate for the donation that they gave that you made on date. If you wanted to, you can add additional fields. For example, maybe I want to put fund, campaign, appeal. Now, just typing these in doesn't put those fields in. I'm just saying this is where the information, this is where I want it to go in my letter. So I still have to go insert my Bloomerang field, search for fund, and there it is. Let's do campaign. and appeal. All right. Now, of course, you would want to personalize this letter for your organization. So I like including the impact that this gift has made. And down here as well, if you have whoever the signatory is, if you have their signature as an image file, you can also insert that here. But it's always nice to have some handwritten elements in your letter, so you can leave that blank and just allow some space for it. So what else do we want to do for this letter? Up here, we have different options for the Ahern audit, page settings, and download preview. The Ahern audit is a great tool to look at the content of your letter. So if we click on that, it's going to give us or show us our results for the U test. And it will give us a count of how many U words we used versus how many we words we use. Ideally, you should use twice as many you words as we words. You being who are you talking to in this letter? In this case, the donor. You want to make it about the donor because you want them to feel the impact that their gift is having. Instead of saying, oh, we did this, you're telling the donor, because you gave, you helped 5 puppies or you helped feed 5 families. It also shows the results for the Flesch-Kincaid reading level test. Ideally, it should be between the 6th and 8th grade level. So right now I'm at a 5th grade level, and if I were if I were doing this for real, of course I would talk a little bit more about the impact that their gift is having, so we'll leave this for now. But we want it to be between the 6th and the 8th grade level because that's a good level that they can skim through the contents of the letter easily, and they can easily absorb the information that is in the letter. If you want to read more about either of these tests, you can click on these buttons and it will take you to help documentation that explains that a little bit more. You also have your page settings here. If you click on the page settings, this defaults to the letter size for the page size with a 1-inch margin all the way around. You can always change that. Let's say you were sending out a save the date and you only want a half letter. You could do that. Or let's say you wanted to have a tear off portion at the bottom. Maybe you'd like to use legal size instead. You can change that up. And then for the margins as well, you can change that. So for today's letter, we inserted a letter that is incorporated into the body of the letter, but maybe you have pre-printed letterheads. You could, instead of inserting that as an image into Bloomerang, or if those are already pre-printed, you can adjust the margin to accommodate that pre-printed letterhead. So maybe instead of 1, you'll add a 1/2 inch of margin because you have those pre-printed letterheads. You can do that as well. We will leave this as is for now and cancel. If you do have those pre-printed letterheads, you can always download a preview. When you download a preview of the letter, it's not going to show any of the merge fields populated yet. So it's just going to show some X's where the merge fields would be, but this is useful if you want to take a look at the general letter or the general look of your letter. Is it running a little bit longer? Do you need to adjust the margins? This is also especially useful if you have those pre-printed letterheads to see if you need to adjust your margins. All right, so let's take a look at our filters. Once we get to our filters, it's automatically excluding any constituents whose status is inactive or deceased, or whose communication restrictions might be do not mail. So that's already excluded. It's also excluding any soft credits. So if you're looking to acknowledge soft credits specifically, you can take out that filter or drag that over to the include section. For today, we're going to leave it. But since these are my thank you letters, and for my organization, we send out our thank you letters on a weekly basis, well, that's what we'll filter for. So we'll go to Add Filter and filter by date. Right now it says during last week. I can always change this up. So for my organization's processes, Do I send that on a daily basis? Maybe I send it out the next day, so I'm filtering for gifts that may have come in yesterday, or maybe I send it out at the end of the day. I can filter for today. You can also filter for a specific date range. So if you click during and select between, that's going to give you a date picker, and you can select specific dates. What I like to use is keep it at during and leave this as is, because once I have this and our process is set, I never have to edit these filters. This is a dynamic filter, so it's going to change based on when I look at it or when I run the letters. So when I run this letter next week, next week will already be this week, so I don't need to change this filter anymore. So we're going to say date is this week. So it looks like I have 27 transactions that have come in this week. Another filter I like to add is, let's see if there's any difference here, the acknowledgement filter. So I have 27 right now. I'm going to add an exclude filter for the acknowledgement status. And I want to take out anything that's already been acknowledged. So maybe we had a first-time donor come in, somebody saw that on our first-time donor call list, and they already called the donor, or they already sent the donor the letter right away. I can take that out. So our number goes down from 27 to 24. So something must have flagged someone else in my organization for those 3 letters that they went ahead and sent those letters right away to acknowledge, and we can exclude that so we don't generate another letter for them. Okay, so we have 24 transactions here for this week. We're going to click Save and Preview. Once we click Save and Preview, it's going to show us a count of the number of the transactions found, any households that were found or skipped. It's looking for households because we have our letter to generate 1 letter per household. So it found 19 households, and there were 5 households skipped. Why might we skip creating letters for constituents? It's probably because their primary address is bad, incomplete, or missing. There might be a blank value for merge fields, but you can always take a look and preview who the recipients are. This is going to show you the first 100 constituents that are going to receive your letter. But you can also take a look at the skipped recipients. So you see here, for example, Rory Williams and Amelia Pond. They don't have an address, or those fields are blank, so it's not going to be able to generate for them. We have here Sam and Dean Winchester. They have a blank campaign and a blank appeal. If I still want to generate the letters for them, even though that's blank, I can always go back and make changes, go to my Details tab, and that's where this comes in. So if I want to allow those blank merge fields, I can click Allow Blank Merge Fields here. When their letter is generated, whatever field here that they don't have, it's just going to be blank. So if that's okay, that's an option for you. Or if you want to go back and edit the transactions before running the letters, you can do that. Or maybe you've rethought it and you don't want these fields after all, you can just delete it. For today, let's just go ahead and allow that for now, and let's see how that looks. So we're going to go back to Save and Preview again. It's still skipping some households that don't have any addresses, or there may be blank. We also have here something that says multiple values for date, multiple values for campaign, and multiple values for appeal. We'll leave that as is and come back to that when I show you the data table. That's where the data table comes in handy. For now, we're going to click Run, and it's going to ask you if you want to do a test or to create your letters for real. When you do a test for larger mailings, of course, this is only going to generate the first 5 letters in your batch. This is for you to take a look at the PDF, see if there's any changes that you would like to make before running the entire batch. This also will not create the interactions yet, will not add to the recent mailings. So again, this is just for verification. If you want to actually create your letters, you can run your letters for real. Let's do a test for now and see how that looks. The big thing with the test that's different from the preview is that it will actually populate the merge fields so you can see how the merge fields look. So let's take a look at that. So you see here we selected to allow blank merge fields because it's an international address. It's just leaving that blank. But you can see that it's populating the amount as well as the date and the fund campaign appeal that we set. We have a letter to Dr. and Mrs. John and Mary Watson. There's their donation. Those are the details. Okay, we have Sam and Dean Winchester here. So you'll see here, because this is a US address, it populated the state, city, and zip code. It populated the gift details. You have here fund is unrestricted, and their gift didn't have a campaign and appeal specified, but in the letter we said to allow that, so it's just going to be blank. So this is a good thing to take a look at. You know, do I want to go back and edit that transaction? Am I okay with having this blank? That's up to you. So let's say my letter is looking good and I'm ready to run the entire batch. I can go back to Bloomerang, go back to my letter, click Save and then Preview, and then Run. And this time we'll run it for real, and we'll see how that changes the constituents' timeline and their transaction. So we'll click Run. Okay, once we click Run, it's going to give us the option to download the letters as well as download the addresses. So this is the address file is particularly useful if you're looking to create mailing labels. You can use this as your source data when you create your mailing labels, or if you want to print directly on envelopes. So you can download the letters from here. It's going to look like our preview. It's going to look like our test with the merge fields populated. But a couple of things happen once we run the letter. First, if we go to letter home, the letter that we run is going to appear under our most recent mailings. Our most recent mailings is always going to include the 5 most recent mailings that I ran. If I run another letter today, it's just going to bump off the oldest letter from our list. And this also shows you how many letters were generated, and you can click on this drop down if you need to download the letters again, or if you need to download the addresses. There's also an option here to delete. We'll come back to this. So the first thing that happens, it appears on your most recent mailings. The second thing that happens is if we go to the constituents account, on their timeline, you're going to see the letter that we just generated. So let's take a look at that letter, or that interaction, I should say. So that interaction, notice, has the purpose of acknowledgement, which is what the purpose of the letter was. The channel is mail. If we scroll down, it also tells us what transactions were acknowledged with this letter. I can click on this and that will take me to the transaction. I can also click here to take me to the actual letter that was generated for this constituent. So this is nice because I can see in Bloomerang the actual letter that we're sending to John Watson. If I wanted to make edits to this letter, just this letter specifically, not the entire batch, I can edit the letter here. Let's say I don't like that extra comma there, so we'll just take that out and then click Save. And because I made a change, or maybe I wanted to add additional wording, I can always download the letter again here. This will only download this particular letter, not the entire batch. This is also useful for, let's say I was a little bit clumsy today and I spilled some tea on John's letter as I was preparing the letters. I can always go back to the interaction and download the letter again. So we'll go back to the timeline. So the second thing that happens is we generate the interaction on the constituents account, and that's automatic. Whatever type of letter you run, or even for emails, if you run that out of Bloomerang, we're going to generate the interaction on the constituents profile. The third thing that happens is if we go to the donation, notice the acknowledgement field here that we took a look at earlier. This has now been changed automatically from no to yes. This is because the purpose of the letter was acknowledgement. So if you have a transaction letter with a purpose of acknowledgement, it's automatically going to flip that acknowledge flag from no to yes. And it's also going to have a link to the interaction with that letter. And if you recall, we excluded any transactions that were already acknowledged. This is the field that it's looking at. So it's looking at the transactions that meet my filters, my include filters. If any of those already have yes as the acknowledgement field, it's going to exclude them from the letter. So that's what happens when you run your thank you letters in Bloomerang. Now let's go back to the letter, because remember, we still have Tony Stark, who gave more than one gift. If we scroll down here, there's my letter, my thank you letter. Before we go into this again, I wanted to point out, if you click on this drop-down arrow, you can edit this letter. You can preview this letter if you want to see what it looks like. You can also copy this letter. So if you have different kinds of letters, this is what I would recommend, because we've already formatted this letter. Our logo or letterhead is already in there. We've already changed some of the name fields, the name merge fields that are in there that I want to use. So instead of creating a new letter from scratch and doing that all over again, adding the logo, adding the letterhead, I can just make a copy and make those little changes within that letter. So this is also thankful for, not thankful. This is also useful for, let's say you have a thank you letter for your monetary gifts. You would have those merge fields there. Let's say you have a different thank you letter, but for your in-kind gifts, or you have a different thank you letter based on the fund, campaign, or appeal. What you can do is just make a copy so that the basics of the letter, the foundations of the letter are the same, and you can just customize it based on what's different. So we're going to make a copy here, because I'm going to want to come back to that and show you some differences that you can make. So that's just going to have weekly thank you letter, and then it's going to say copy. So we can go into this. So it's still going to say copy. I can always change the details up here if I would like. For today, I'm going to take this out, because what I want to do now is insert a data table in case I have constituents that have more than one gift that meets the filters. So instead of having just these merge fields up here, I'm going to include a Bloomerang data table. What the data table does is that it itemizes the different transactions that meets the filter. So we'll click Bloomerang data table. By default, it's going to have columns for date, amount, and fund. I can add up to 5 columns. So maybe I want to include campaign, maybe I also want to include appeal, or it's really up to you. As I mentioned earlier, it's good to just browse and look through the different options that are available for you. So that informs you about what you would like to include in your letter. So let's say we want to include appeal. So right now we're using date, amount, fund, campaign, appeal. Similar to merge fields, depending on the type of letter that you're running, you might be using different columns in your letter. So right now we have date. Actually, I want to move this to the end, the amount here. You can change the alignment within the table. You can also change the alignment of the table itself. I'm going to have that left aligned for now. So we have date, fund, campaign, appeal, amount. If I change my mind and I want a different column instead, I can remove any of these and add that new column that I want. So we're going to click insert. That looks a little odd, so we'll move that there a little bit. That's going to adjust based on the contents of the table. Okay, so we wanted to thank you for amount. So amount here, notice we're adding the data table because we know we might have constituents that gave more than once. But what is it going to populate for amount in that case? If you have constituents who gave more than once, the amount field, any number or currency fields are going to total. So let's say I have a constituent that gave 2 gifts of $100 each. This table will itemize each gift and show the details for each gift, but the amount will total and will show me the $200. However, for date, we can't possibly show the 2 dates here. We only have room to show 1, and the system is not going to make an assumption of which date you would like to use. So in that case, because I have the date field in the table anyway, I can just take that out. So you can even change up this wording. Let's say we wanted to thank you for your donation. You can even say totally, and then you can have amount. But for now, we'll leave that as amount. Sometimes it's just useful to have on the left-hand side here because the table doesn't have a totals column. So sometimes what we'll do is have something that says total. And if we want to, we can put the amount in there instead. And have this be left aligned so it looks like that's totaling, if you want. Let's say I changed my mind. I have the amount up there anyway, and I would like my letter to look a little bit cleaner. So I'm just going to have that center aligned and have this be the total amount of the donations. For our filters, if we go back, remember this is the exact same letter. We just copied it. Earlier, we ran 24 letters, but because we're already excluding anything that we've already acknowledged, it's down to 4. And true enough, we can see here that Tony Stark has given more than 1 gift that meets our filters. So we'll click Save and Preview. It looks like it's skipping bad addresses, but we have Tony Stark here. So let's run that letter. Let's run a test and see how that looks. Okay, we'll download the letter. And we want to see how the data table looks. So we can see here, we're saying we wanted to thank you for your $11,000 donation. These are the dates, the funds, campaign appeal, and the amount. And it looks like he has a $0 amount there. What's going on? That's because for my database, I'm putting my in-kind gifts with a $0 amount. So maybe I want to make changes to this letter because I don't want a letter that shows up with a $0 amount. So I'm going to go back to my letter, and because I know that that came in as an in-kind gift, maybe I want to exclude in kind because I want to run a separate letter for that, and I want to show different details for their in-kind gift. So I'm going to exclude method of in-kind. I'm going to go to my details here and say monetary with data table. So I know exactly what that letter is. and this time save and preview. We should still have Tony Stark. Perfect. With his $11,000, that's the 2 gifts. So if we click run and do a test, download the letters. Wonderful. So now it's showing us his total for those 2 gifts, and it's itemizing the details for those 2 gifts. So that's how I would use the data table if the constituent has more than 1 gift that meets the filters. Let's take a look at, so let's actually run this letter so we can see how it looks on Tony's profile. So we'll make changes, save and preview. We'll always give you the opportunity to preview before you actually run. We'll click run. This time we'll create the actual letters. And we know that once the letters are actually created, we can download the letters, we can download the addresses. It appears under our most recent mailings. If we go to Tony Stark's account, there's the thank you letter. There's the interaction for the thank you letter. If we click into that interaction, it's going to show the 2 transactions that were acknowledged with this gift. So if you have a letter that's acknowledging more than 1 gift, it will show each of those transactions under acknowledged transactions. If I want to make changes, personalize the letter a little bit, or if I wanted to reprint that 1 letter from the batch, I can always go here and reprint or edit from there. So that's how you would create your letter if you had more than 1 letter or more than 1 gift within the time frame that you're acknowledging. Before we open it back up to letters, I'm going to go back down because we still have that in-kind gift that hasn't been acknowledged yet from Tony Stark. So I'm going to go back to my letters again. I'm going to make another copy of this letter, and this time I'm going to make it for my in-kind gifts. So we made a copy, and that's over here. I'm going to go to details right away and say that that's my in-kind gift. Now, I'm using the method as the differentiator here. If maybe you're using fund, campaign, or appeal, you can do the same thing and say, this is my weekly thank you for this campaign or that campaign. For now, we'll leave that as thank you for in-kind. I'm going to go back to my filter, and instead of excluding gifts that are in kind, I'm going to drag that over to our include, so I'm only generating this letter for in kind gifts. And then I'm going to go back to my design. Now, because in my database I use a $0 amount for my gifts, that's not the field that I want to use. So I can say things, for example, thank you for your donation of, and I'm familiar with Bloomerang, so I know to search for these fields. You can always browse to see what fields are available to you, or you can search in kind and see what kind of in kind fields are available to use. So in this case, what I want to use is description. So it's going to say, we wanted to thank you for your donation of whatever the description is. And if I want to, I can say valued at. And this time, because in my database, this is how I track it, I would insert the in-kind fair market value. Now it's up to me if I want to include a data table as well. Maybe they have more than one in-kind gift, or even if they don't, I want to keep the data table and itemize the different details. I can go in there and edit the columns that I want. So let's say instead of campaign and appeal and amount, I want to insert the in-kind fields. So I'm going to go back here, search for in-kind. Let's go with in-kind type. That's going to tell me if this is a good or a service. I also want to add in-kind description, and I want to add in-kind fair market value. So that's going to change my table a little bit. And before we run this letter, let's take a look at that in-kind transaction on Tony's timeline so we understand where those fields are being pulled from. So we'll go to Tony Stark. There's his in-kind gift. Once I selected, so when I was entering this donation and I selected a method of in-kind, additional fields appear. So in this case, these are the additional fields for my in-kind method. I have type, fair market value, and description. So if I select a method of in-kind, these are the merge fields that are going to be useful for that type. We're going to cancel and go back to our letter. We'll click Save and Preview. We'll click Run and we can do a test. We'll see how the letter looks. And that's how our letter is going to look. So it's going to insert our merge fields for the in-kind values and whatever you're tracking. We have a quick question here or comment that came in. NPOs are not supposed to assign a value to in-kind gifts. That is true. It is up to the donor to assign that value along with their tax professional and or appraisal receipt. So if they gave you the appraisal, you can add that value in. If not, it is up to the donor. It is actually the donor's responsibility to assign that value. And that is not a required value in Bloomerang. So even if you select a method of in-kind, sorry, I'll go back here. Even if you select a method of in-kind, that is not required. So you don't have to fill that out. Thank you for that comment. Thank you for that clarification, Lisa. All right. We're going to go back to our letter home, and the same thing happens once we actually run that letter. It's going to generate the interactions on the constituents timeline. It's going to acknowledge or flip that acknowledgement flag from yes to no, and it's going to appear in your most recent mailings. And of course, you can create as many letters as you need in Bloomerang and customize it based on what you need. The great thing about our letters as well is that you can run letters in batch. It just really depends on how many transactions meet your filters. So in this case, for example, I have a letter here where 17 letters met my filters. I have a different letter where only one letter or one gift met my filter. So the number of letters that you're going to generate really depends on how many letters meet your filters. I wanted to come back here, and there's an option here that we took a look at that said delete. What does this delete button do? Let's say I made a huge glaring typo in my letter that I didn't catch earlier when I ran the test. And good thing though that I haven't printed them out yet. I just caught it in the PDF. I can go back in here. Let's say this batch of 17 letters was the one that had the typo. I can click this drop-down arrow and click delete, and that's going to delete the mailing. It's not going to delete the letter template. It's only going to delete the mailing. And that means that it's going to delete the interactions and it's going to delete the letter PDFs. It will also give you the option to reset the acknowledgement flag to no if you want. Typically when I do this, I go ahead and reset the acknowledgement field to no, since I know that I'm going to rerun the letters anyway. So if you want to make a change after you've already generated the letters in Bloomerang, it doesn't matter if you've already printed out the PDFs or not, but if you've already generated the letter and you want to redo something and you want to this is basically your undo. It's like the mailing hasn't happened yet. You can use this delete option. So I can click delete. That's going to delete the mailing. It's going to take it out of my most recent mailings. If we go back to John Watson, the interactions have disappeared and the transaction has been flipped back to no, it hasn't been acknowledged yet. So I can fix whatever it was I needed to fix in my letter and rerun the batch, and the same thing will happen. It'll generate the interactions. It will flip the acknowledgement flag from yes to no. If I want to make changes to the letter, to the entire batch, I'm just going to go ahead and go into the letter itself. Whatever changes I make in the letter here, that's going to affect everyone in the batch when I run the transaction. Of course, this will affect it, and this will apply to after I run the letter. If I've already run the letters and then make changes here, it's not going to change the interaction or the letter that's already on their timeline. So if I want to make changes to the batch, I should make changes to the letter itself before running the letters. If I want to make changes to the individual letters, I'm going to go to the interaction itself, make a change to that constituent's letter, and re-download their letter from there. Thank you for all of your questions. Before we take more questions, I wanted to show everyone our NCOA, or National Change of Address feature. This is especially helpful because it saves you a lot of time and a lot of money when you're sending out letters to make sure that the letters are actually getting to your constituents. So if you are an administrator in your database, you can go to your settings, my organization, and all the way at the bottom, there's a section for NCOA. I already have my NCOA processing turned on in my database, but if you don't, this is going to say activate NCOA processing. I want to show you what happens once you've activated this feature. So first of all you need to do is click on that activate button, and you will get the benefits of free nightly NCOA processing if you have a standard Bloomerang license. All you need to do is click that button to turn it on, and that can happen as much as nightly for your database. We'll take a look at a couple of constituents here in my database whose addresses or whose accounts have been updated because of this NCOA feature. So there's 3 things that you'll see in terms of addresses that can be updated because of the NCOA update. So if we go to Judith here and we go to her profile, you'll see that she has 2 addresses on her profile. If I click edit on any of these addresses, you'll see that there is an NCOA note on her address, and this is something I can report on. This will tell you when the NCOA update was made. This shows you the date that my database was updated. The reason it's showing us that her account has been updated is because they were able to find a move record with her address. If you've ever experienced moving and then going to the post office to fill out the NCOA, the National Change of Address, let's say you're going to forward your mail to the new address, that's where this NCOA information comes from. This tells me our partners, True Givers, who run the NCOA for us, found that this constituent had moved, and this tells you the move date as well. To avoid any confusion, we also tell you what their old address was. Let's say you enter a new constituent in the database, or you have an existing constituent in the database, the NCOA is run, and we found that there was a move for this constituent. If a move has been found, it's going to first add the new address to the constituent account. Second, mark that new address as primary. And third, you have that NCOA note so you know what happened and why that address was changed. Another reason that you might see an NCOA update on an address is if the address was standardized. So we take a look at the addresses that are in your database, we compare them against the U.S. Postal Service and standardize them according to USPS standards. So these could be things like road spelled out, R-O-A-D versus road, R-D, or suite, or breaking down how to enter apartment numbers or suite numbers. Those are standardized according to USPS standards. So that's another reason you might see in an NCOA note. A third reason you might see an NCOA note is, let's say it's a non-mailable address. So you can see here, I have this constituent that has a note and it's a bad address. If we look at the constituent's profile, click on Edit to see the address, you'll notice that there's an NCOA note here, again telling us when this was updated. And the reason this was updated is because this was non-mailable. This comes directly from the USPS, so the USPS is telling us that this address is non-mailable. So if it finds any non-mailable addresses in the system, it's going to add that NCOA note, and it's going to automatically mark that address as bad because they can't deliver to that address. Now, you can report on all of this information. So if you start a constituent report, click Include and search for has addresses. We're going to look for specific addresses and look for note. So if you're wanting to find out so after you turn on the NCOA processing or after you activate the NCOA processing, if you would like to see which records were updated via the NCOA, you can run this report. Look for note contains, type in NCOA, click OK, and these are all the different addresses or all the different constituents that were updated. I can also add a column for the note itself, so I can take a look at what the reason was. So if it was because it was standardized, or if it was non-mailable, or if it was because of a move, I can see why exactly that account was changed, and I can click through to see what was changed about each account. We have a couple of questions here. So how do you add it in again, or how do you turn it on again? Before we do that, I'm going to save this report before we navigate away. And maybe that's a report I always want to have in my database. But if I want to turn it on again, it's under settings. So you have to be an administrator user in the database to turn that on. So go to settings, view all settings, my organization, and all the way down. If you have a standard license with Bloomerang, you're going to have this section for NCOA processing. Your button is going to say Activate NCOA Processing, so you can click on that button and you can get updates as frequently as nightly. I say as frequently as nightly because it depends on the information that you already have in your database and how often you're entering information in your database. But once you turn that on, you do get an email if there's any updates that happen to the database, and you can report on those notes. And this NCOA is for the US Postal Services, so this will take a look at US addresses. Thank you for that question. We have another question here on the NCOA processing. Will it change primary from work to home or vice versa? That is a great question. If they have their work address as their primary, it's always checking against that primary address to see if there's any NCOAs filed with the US Postal Service. It's not going to make any changes between work and home for whichever your primary address is. There's also a last thing that the NCOA processing does that doesn't change the addresses, and that has to do with deceased suppression. This already comes with your NCOA processing. The service comes with scanning the first name and last name plus the address of the constituent. If a deceased match is found with the first name and last name plus the address of that constituent, it's going to mark that constituent as deceased in your database as well. So that's a good service, especially when you're running letters, because you don't want to accidentally send letters to constituents that may have already passed away. So that's another service that's included with our NCOA services. And that's how it works. Let's take a look at a couple of questions here before we finish up for the day. Please confirm if NCOA determines that the address is bad or non-mailable, it creates a note, flags the address as bad, but does not delete the address. Yes. So the NCOA service does not delete any information in your database. If it's non-mailable, it will still keep the address in your database, but will mark it as bad. So that's a good point. You can run that NCOA report, or you can run that report looking for any NCOA updates. And if anything was marked as bad, maybe you can determine why that was marked as bad. Maybe the zip code was missing a number or something was off, and you can make that change. It will keep that address still in the system. So the NCOA service does not delete anything in your database. We have another question here. Does it change former constituents' addresses or constituents entered moving forward? Great question. It looks at your entire database. So it doesn't matter if those constituents were already in your database before or these are new constituents. It looks at your entire database for the NCOA processing. Thank you so much for all of your questions today. I'm so glad that you were able to join us today and take a look at our letters and NCOA feature. If you have additional questions, please don't hesitate to contact our support team. So thank you again, and we hope to see you in another Academy class soon. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Bye.